Hey guys, today on Watch with Poppy, we're going to be talking about the latest episode of The Vampire Diaries. And this was a good one, you guys. A really, really good one. Sad, but good. So remember at the end of the last episode, Jeremy died. That was kind of the kicker. You know, Catherine showed up, fed Jeremy to Silas, stole the cure, and left. And basically, Silas snaps Jeremy's neck, and we see him fall dead to the ground. So at the beginning of this episode, we see Elena run to the cave to find Jeremy. She freaks out, but then she sees that he's wearing his ring, and so she feels a little calmer about that. But then we quickly flash to Stefan and Damon having a conversation, and Stefan's the voice of reason. He's the one who says, look, Jeremy was one of the 5, which means he was supernatural, which means the ring's not gonna work. But Elena's not hearing that, and so in the end they decide, look, Stefan, you take Elena home with Jeremy, and Damon decides to stay to find Bonnie, because Bonnie's missing. You know, like last time we saw Bonnie, she was stabbed on the floor, but somehow she's gone. So Damon is scouring the island trying to find Bonnie. He does run into Rebecca, who of course thinks they all betrayed her, but he explains who it was and what happened, and so she kind of sticks with him as they're trying to find Bonnie. They end up finding the hunter, because he tries to kill them, of course, and they interrogate him and eventually find out that he was working with Catherine. Like, she promised him that she'd help him find Silas, but she's Catherine, so in the end she betrays everyone, because that's what she does. He also tells them that Haley, the werewolf, the one that was Tyler's friend from several episodes ago that no one liked, that we all knew was not good, it turns out that she was kind of Catherine's, like, insider information, so she was just bad all the way around. Now, Bonnie wakes up, she's laying on the ground, like in front of a fire, and as she sits up to try to kind of figure out where she's at, Shane shows up. And he's walking around like he's normal, even though Bonnie looks at his leg and it's like all bloody and broken. And she's like, what are you doing? How did I get here? How are you okay? And he tells her Silas did it. Basically then he proceeds to tell her that Jeremy's dead, and Bonnie loses it. And then he tells her, don't worry, like, Silas can bring him back. We just have to complete the triangle. Now remember, he's already done 2 of the massacres, but there needs to be 3 in order to complete the triangle, and when that happens, then all of the dead loved ones can come back. Basically, it's crazy talk, and what happens is it feels like Shane infects Bonnie with his crazy, with his Silas craziness, and she is so, like, grieved by the fact that Jeremy's dead, and she, like, sees a vision of him, and you get that Silas is, like, playing with her mind, and in the end, she just kind of says, I'll do whatever you want. Like, as long as we can bring Jeremy back, I'll do anything. Okay, now let's go back to Mystic Falls, because finally everyone gets home, and, you know, they bring Jeremy's body into the Gilbert house. Elena's like, put him upstairs in his bed, and she's like holding his hand and just like, I'm gonna stay here until he wakes up, because she is basically in complete denial. Complete and total denial. And it was just so sad, you know, as Stefan, you see that he wants to try to do something or say something, and Caroline too, but what do you say to someone in that moment? There comes this point too where Stefan and Caroline are talking on the porch, and I think it's Caroline who's like, what's that smell? And they realize that it's the body. You know, I guess their whole like super vampire senses, like they're smelling the body start to decompose, which means that Jeremy is really dead. And so Elena is like completely blocking that out. They try a bunch of different things, like they try to get Meredith Fell to come over to be like, Elena, let me take the body, but she like loses it at her. And then Matt walks in. Oh my gosh, Matt was just excellent in this episode. But Matt walks in, and he stops Elena because she's freaking out and yelling at Meredith Fell. And as he comes in, he turns to the bed and he sees Jeremy, and he just breaks. He just starts to cry. And Elena, who I think is like barely holding on, is just like, don't you cry, because he's not dead. Like, it's gonna be okay, it's gonna be okay, you can't cry. It was just so sad. But Elena is still really in denial. Now, what doesn't help is that eventually Bonnie finds Damon, and so he's like, great, let's get you home, and she tells him, I know how to help Jeremy, I know how to bring Jeremy back. So when they get news of that back in Mystic Falls, you know, they're really excited and like full of hope a little bit, but when they get there, you know, everyone's all excited, and they pull up, get out of the car, and Caroline's outside, and Damon's just like, could you tell Stefan to come outside? And Caroline's like, what? Like, Bonnie's gonna, you know, fix things? And Damon is just like, tell him to come outside, Caroline. So Stefan comes outside, and basically Damon is just like, look, she's crazy. She's been talking crazy stuff, like, all the way home. Like, she wants to do something crazy. And then you flash into the house where you see Bonnie at the table with Elena, Matt, and Caroline, and she's telling them what she has to do. Which, of course, is another massacre. She has to kill 12 people to complete the triangle, and then once the triangle is complete, what happens is, they kind of explain the whole, like, the witch Ketsia created this kind of, like, purgatory for supernatural creatures, and once the third massacre is done, the magic will allow her to kind of like bring the wall down between our world and this kind of purgatory. So yes, you know, the dead loved ones will come back, like Jeremy will come back, but so will all of the other like supernatural creatures that are on the other side. So of course, everyone at the table is just like, are you crazy? Like, do you hear what you're saying? And then there's just this shot of Elena who is just sitting there, like looking straight ahead, like I think beginning to realize that, you know, the finality of what's happening while everyone else is yelling around her. And I'm telling you, Bonnie has completely caught the like crazy bug from Shane. I mean, she's at that level where she's with him. He was willing to do anything to see his family again, and I think she's at that level, like she's willing to do anything to see Jeremy again. So what kind of breaks this whole thing up is the phone rings, Elena gets up to answer the phone, and it's April. And April asks to speak to Jeremy, and Elena's like, well, he can't come to the phone right now. And then she goes, because he's dead. And it was just like, oh my gosh, someone just had her moment. And in that moment, it was like she realizes, she runs upstairs, she pulls the cover from his face, and like, you see that he's dead, like he's changing color, and she starts to smell the smell, and she just freaks. I mean, she's like, how long has he smelled like that? How have I not been able to smell that? It's like all of a sudden, all of the denial and everything else she was trying to push away just kind of closes in on her at once. So she like loses it, you guys. And big ups to Nina Dobrev, because there was some serious acting going on in this scene where she loses it. I mean, it was fantastic. So she comes downstairs and she tells Damon to bring the body downstairs, and she's like, I've got a plan, and they're all like, what are you talking about? And she finds the lighter fluid and she starts, you know, spreading it everywhere, like we're gonna burn the house down. That's gonna be our cover story for Jeremy's death. We're gonna burn this house down. I don't care about this place anymore. I don't want these memories anymore. Everyone I loved that lived in this place is dead. And they're all like in shock as they look at her, just like, and Caroline's like, Elena, stop it, you're scaring me. And it was just crazy weird, and she just freaks. And at the last second before she lights the match, that, you know, Damon, you know, grabs the match, and she just breaks down at that point, and she's like crying and screaming. And that's when Stefan says to Damon, like, Damon, do something. Because obviously, because of the sire bond, Damon can really do that. I mean, he can control her emotions to some degree by just telling her, look, you need to stop. And she will. And so he bends down and tells her to turn it off, right? And you're freaking out because you know what that means. Well, let's remember when Klaus did that to Stefan, what happened. As soon as he says it, Stefan is like, Damon, no, like that's not what I meant. And Damon is like, you know that this is what we need to do. You know it's the right thing to do. And you could just tell that Stefan is not happy that that's the way he's chosen to kind of calm her down. And so Damon basically tells her, turn it off. Turn off your emotions, turn off everything that's in there that makes it hurt, just turn it off and we'll be fine. There was this really cool scene too, like later, you know, Caroline leaves. Throughout this episode, you saw her like calling Tyler and leaving him voicemail messages to tell him what's going on. And he's not calling back. And you get that he's trying to really kind of release her to some degree. You know, like if he tries to keep, you know, trading voicemails with her, she's never going to move on. And he doesn't know how long he's going to have to be gone, obviously. So that was really sad as you saw her kind of do that. Really quickly too, before we talk about the end, I want to talk about Matt for a second. I just thought he was so excellent in this episode. There's a scene at the end too, once he realizes that it's over, once they realize that what Bonnie wants to do is crazy, you see him in his car and he just kind of breaks down. And if you think about it, you know, like Matt is the only human that's left, you know, in their circle of friends. And I think like Matt is the one that kind of centers them and grounds them and keeps them kind of like from like completely losing control. And really, I feel at times like Matt is really the heart of what happens, you know, Mystic Falls and what happens in that group of friends. He is their heart. So to see him that broken up, it was just like, it was such a well done scene. So flashback to the house, you know, Elena's inside being very calm, of course, because her emotions have been turned off. And there's this fantastic scene between Damon and Stefan, and as they're out on the porch and they're talking about what happened. And at one point, you know, Stefan, like, it's like he goes to tell Damon, like, I love you. Like, he can't even get the words out. And it was such a nice little scene as Damon is just like, I know, you know, like, I know. And he reaches out to, like, put his hand on Stefan's shoulder. And I think it's that moment where they both realize, like, look how lucky we are. Like, we may hate each other at times, but, you know, even though we became vampires, we still have each other. We still have family, and we'll have family, you know, for eternity. I don't know, it was just like in that moment, I think they realized that they needed to be thankful for each other. So that was, yeah, it was a really cool little scene. And I think it's been a little while since we've had one of those, hey brother, I love you kind of scenes that was more obvious. So the big kicker at the end is that emotionless Elena is in the house by herself. You see her looking at a picture of her and Jeremy. She puts it down. She goes over to the fireplace, gets another match, lights it, and is ready to, like, let it loose again. So the boys come in, and Damon's like, you know, come on, you shouldn't do that. And Elena's like, why not? And then Stefan says to her, like, look, what happens if one day you want to come back home? And Elena says, I won't. And we see her drop the match on the floor, and the house sets on fire. And you see the house burn. I mean, it was just like, it was epic, you know, as you think about it. I mean, like, we have seen the Gilbert house all the way from episode number 1. And so to see it burn down, I mean, obviously it's so symbolic of Elena's life as a human. And her old life is gone, and her kind of maybe accepting that. And you have this really poignant scene as well as you see the three of them walking away from the house as it starts to burn. I will note as well, too, that Stefan is the only one that looks back, I think. You know, like, he's the only one who's, like, looking back in remembrance, I think, of not only of the people that lived and died there, but you know, of that life, of that Elena that really is kind of gone. The fire thing too, like at the end, like one of the last things that they show is her journal. Like they show Elena's journal burning, and that again just feeds back into that whole kind of like this being kind of symbolic of her old life being done. But it was just so sad. It was just sad to kind of see those words that she'd written and that life that she'd lived, you know, just be burned away. Now back on the island, Rebecca finds the hunter and she's still talking to him, and he basically tells her, Silas is awake, you don't know what he looks like, so watch out. So I guess we're going to be seeing Silas at some point. The other kind of big shocker that I just want to mention that I figured out about 5 minutes before the reveal is that Shane is dead. So Rebecca finds his body on the island. He's dead. So that means what Bonnie's been seeing is not real, and that is Silas, and he is inside her head, trying to push her, trying to get her to do the third kind of massacre. And let's remember that, you know, all of the hype about Silas is that he's going to bring about the end of days. So I think nothing is more end of days than Bonnie doing that spell and that wall coming down and all those supernatural creatures coming out into the world. That would be a really bad thing. I think Bonnie's not going to stop. You know, like, I think they're going to have to figure out what to do with her. It looks like in the previews for next week, they're still dealing with the whole new Elena, who is free of emotion. But at the same time, I think it doesn't matter that Jeremy's body burned up. You know, Bonnie's going to do whatever she can. And who's going to stop her, really? So that'll be interesting to see how they deal with that. One thing I want to say, too, about this episode is, so they burned the house down, and the whole thought was, if there's a fire, that will explain why Jeremy's dead. But let's not forget the phone call. You know, when April Young called Elena, Elena told her that Jeremy was dead, and that was before the fire. So I don't know if that's going to come back to bite her. I guess we'll see. So I thought this episode was really, really good, you guys. And I feel like for the first time this season, I'm actually enjoying Elena Gilbert again. Like, she has driven me crazy this season. She really has, up until probably the last couple of episodes. And this episode, she was really great. And not just because she was sad and upset about Jeremy, but just her character. I think it's interesting where they're taking her. And I think it'll be interesting to see how they develop Elena now. Because obviously they can turn her emotions back on, but I don't know. I guess we'll see when or if they do that. Okay, guys, that's it for me today. I will talk to you again soon. Bye.